All right, let's get bloody. Looks like we're diving into the Hatchet franchise today.
Yeah, you've got a whole stack of articles and notes here. Someone's ready to get gruesome.
Definitely more than just a surface level slash and dash here. We're going deep.
Way deeper than the Louisiana swamp Hatchet takes place in.
Haha, exactly.
Hmm.
We're talking about a deep dive into what makes this franchise tick,
Mm.
not just, the blood and guts.
Right, like what sets it apart? What makes it special?
Yeah, I'm seeing stuff about a love for those classic 80s horror movies and, hold on, a villain with a tragic past.
Definitely not your typical slasher villain, that's for sure. And yeah, we'll get into all of that. But first, I gotta say, Hatchet really nails that 80s slasher vibe. It's like a love letter to those classic films.
Like Friday the 13th and all those.
Exactly. But with its own unique flavor, you know? It's not just a straight-up copycat.
One of the articles you sent mentioned that the creator, Adam Green, was kind of frustrated with all the CGI in horror movies back in the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah, totally. He wanted to bring back that gritty, real feeling, you know? Like the
Mm.
stuff that makes your skin crawl.
So practical effects is that what we're talking about?
Absolutely. Like, Hatchet is almost a reaction to that trend of overusing CGI. And it makes a huge difference in how the movie feels. It's like so in your face.
Visceral, right. Like you're really there in the swamp with these characters.
Exactly. You mentioned that scene in your notes, the one where
Oh, yeah. No spoilers, but that one was wild.
just thinking about how they did that with,
Okay, stop.
yeah,
No spoilers. But seriously, even reading about the practical effects for that scene was amazing.
real artistry for sure. But for folks who haven't seen every slasher film out there, you might be wondering, like, why does this whole throwback style work so well for Hatchet?
Yeah, why doesn't it feel dated or cheesy?
Well, because it uses those familiar tropes as, like, a starting point. But then it builds something more complex on top of that.
Mhm.
And a perfect example of this is Victor Crowley, the villain.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned him before. He's got this tragic backstory. Doesn't sound like your typical slasher bad guy.
Oh, he is so much more than just a masked killer.
All right, I'm hooked. Tell
Yeah.
me everything. What makes Victor Crowley so special?
Okay, so he was born with this really severe facial deformity. And because of that, he was like totally ostracized. People were cruel to him his whole life.
Oh, that's rough.
And then there's this tragic accident where his own father accidentally kills him with a hatchet, of course.
Wow. But how does that lead to him, haunting the swamp and murdering people?
That tragedy is like the fuel for his rage. He's trapped in this cycle of pain and vengeance, always seeking retribution.
So we kind of understand why he's doing what he's doing, even if we don't agree with it.
Exactly. It adds a layer of complexity to his character. He's not just evil for the sake of being evil.
Right. He's a product of his circumstances.
Mhm.
And speaking of adding layers, what about Mary Beth, the main character? She's not just a victim, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Mary Beth is incredibly resourceful. And we see her evolve so much across the films. Like, she goes from being terrified to becoming a real warrior.
I saw in one of your articles that
Oh,
she...
yeah, no spoilers, but
Right. But it made me think about those iconic final girls in horror movies,
Mhm.
like Laurie Strode from Halloween.
Mhm.
Where does Mary Beth fit in with those characters?
That's a great question. It's like they all share this incredible strength, you know, the will to survive. But Mary Beth, she's maybe even more proactive.
So it's not just about escaping, it's about fighting back,
Yeah.
taking control.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes her such a compelling character, especially because we see that evolution over time,
Right.
which actually reminds me of another thing that sets Hatchet apart.
What's that?
It's got this dedicated fan base, like a real cult following, even though it's not a huge mainstream blockbuster.
Yeah, I saw that one article called it a cult classic. Why do you think it resonates so much with horror fans?
Well, it's got to be that blend of nostalgia for those classic 80s slashers, that commitment to practical effects we talked about. And, oh, this is a big one.
Okay, what? Don't leave me hanging.
It doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, it has a sense of humor.
Wait, Hatchet. A horror movie.
Yeah.
Humor. I'm not sure I'm following you.
Oh, yeah, big time. It's self-aware. It pokes fun at all those slasher tropes while still delivering the scares.
Okay, now I need an example. What kind of humor are we talking about? Don't spoil any jokes, though. I know you want to.
Well, let's just say they really know how to handle the gore. It's over the top, but in a fun way.
Like, they're in on the joke.
Totally. It makes it more entertaining, even for people who aren't diehard horror fans.
Okay, I see what you mean. This humor element.
Oh, we need to dig into this. But before we do, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Victor Crowley. We talked about how his past turned him into this vengeful spirit, but one of your notes mentioned something about him being a reflection of societal prejudices. Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. You know, Crowley's appearance, his deformity, it makes him an outsider right from the start.
And people treated him terribly because of it.
Exactly. Fear, ridicule, even violence. It really makes you think about how we treat people who are different, who don't fit in.
So are we supposed to feel sorry for this guy? I mean, he is a brutal killer.
I don't think it's about condoning his actions, but more about understanding where they come from. Like, he's a symbol of what can happen when someone is constantly rejected and dehumanized.
That makes sense. It's like those classic monster movies where the monster is almost a tragic figure.
Oh, yeah, like Frankenstein's monster.
Right. You sympathize with them even though they're doing terrible things.
Exactly. Crowley and Frankenstein's monster, they both challenge that whole idea of what makes a monster. Like, are they born evil or are they made that way by how they're treated?
It's a good question. Hatchet really makes you think.
It does. There's one kill that you mentioned in your notes, the one with the...
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Super gruesome, but
But there's something about how it's filmed, the way it's presented.
yeah, almost like a twisted kind of justice.
Right, and that's what makes Hatchet so interesting. It blends horror with social commentary. It makes you confront some pretty uncomfortable stuff.
All while delivering those over-the-top kills. Haha. But speaking of uncomfortable stuff, let's get back to Mary Beth. What does her journey tell us about dealing with trauma, about being resilient?
It's all about reclaiming her power. You know, she starts out as a victim, but she refuses to stay that way.
So it's not just about survival. It's about healing, fighting back.
Exactly. It's about breaking free from that cycle of violence that Crowley represents.
That's powerful. And it goes beyond just horror movies, right?
Of course, it's about the human spirit, overcoming adversity, finding the strength to fight back against the darkness.
You know, one article compared Mary Beth to Ripley from Alien.
Oh, yeah, I see that. Both of them are strong women who survive these horrifying ordeals.
They refuse to be victims.
Right. They're smart, resourceful, and they represent a different kind of strength that you don't always see in horror.
Okay, so we've talked about how Hatchet twists those classic horror tropes, how it makes you think about bigger issues, and how it still manages to be fun and self-aware.
Yeah.
But let's go back to that nostalgia factor for a second.
Yeah.
Why do you think throwing back to those 80s slashers works so well?
I think there's a longing for simpler times in horror when practical effects were everything.
Like a longing for those really tangible scares.
Yeah. Like when you see a monster made with practical effects, you know it's really there. It
Yeah.
just adds to the impact.
I think I read somewhere that Adam Green, the creator, he actually started out working in practical effects.
Oh, yeah. He worked on movies like Jason X and Freddy vs. Jason.
So no wonder he's so passionate about it.
Yep.
But do you think this renewed interest in practical effects is just a fad, a nostalgia thing?
I think it's more than that. Practical effects, they ground the horror in reality. It's like there's a weight to it that CGI just doesn't have.
I know what you mean. You feel it on a gut level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about the gore. It's about the creativity, the artistry.
Right. You know that scene where...
Stop. No spoilers.
Oh, right. Sorry. But that's a great example of how practical effects can create something truly unique and terrifying. It takes real skill.
Okay, I'm convinced. Practical effects are amazing. But speaking of amazing, we have to talk about the swamp setting. It's like a character in itself, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What is it about swamps that makes them perfect for horror?
Swamps are just inherently creepy, right? They're dark, murky, full of hidden dangers.
Yeah, and they're often associated with death and decay.
Exactly. It's like the untamed part of nature where the rules of civilization don't apply.
I remember one of your notes mentioned that the swamp in Hatchet is like a reflection of Crowley himself.
Oh, absolutely. They're both isolated, dangerous, full of secrets.
So the swamp is like a visual representation of his inner turmoil.
Yes, it's his domain where he can really unleash his rage.
And it adds to the tension in the movie. You feel trapped, like there's no escape.
Exactly. The swamp becomes another obstacle for the characters to overcome. It's brilliant.
Speaking of overcoming obstacles, let's talk about that self-aware humor that makes Hatchet so unique. You said it pokes fun at slasher tropes. Can you give me a specific example?
Well, the gore is a big one. It's so over the top, so ridiculous that it becomes funny.
Like they're not even trying to be realistic.
Exactly. It's like they're winking at the audience saying, "We know this is crazy, but come on, it's fun."
I definitely remember laughing at some of those kills, even though they were super gory.
Right. And that shared laughter, it creates this bond between the film and the audience.
It makes the horror more enjoyable.
Yeah. even if you're a little grossed out at the same time.
So it's not just about mindless gore. It has a purpose. It pushes boundaries and keeps things interesting.
And that's what makes Hatchet different. It's a horror movie that's not afraid to have fun.
You know, that self-awareness reminds me of Scream.
Oh yeah, good one. Both of them play with horror conventions, but in different ways.
Right. Scream is more about commenting on the rules of horror, but Hatchet is more subtle.
They both show that horror can be fun and self-referential.
But it's a delicate balance, right?
Yeah,
You don't want to lose the horror entirely.
totally. And Hatchet finds that balance perfectly. It's scary, but it's also a lot of fun. Which brings us to the cult following. We've talked about why horror fans love it, but what makes the Hatchet fandom so special?
Yeah, a lot of the articles mention how dedicated the fans are. It's more than just liking a movie, it seems.
I think it's the sense of community. It's like they really embrace the whole spirit of the films, that playful, over-the-top energy.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a real sense of belonging within the fandom.
Absolutely. Like, go to a Hatchet convention and it's like a big family reunion, a super bloody one, of course.
Uh-huh, right. One article even talked about how Adam Green, the director, is really involved with the fans. Like, he'll show up at conventions and just hang out.
Oh, yeah, he's super accessible. And it really makes a difference. It's like he's built this community around the films.
It shows that he really cares about the fans and what he created. Okay, but shifting gears a bit, we focused a lot on Victor Crowley. But what about the actor who plays him, Kane Hodder? He's kind of a horror legend.
Oh, he totally is. I mean, he played Jason Voorhees in a bunch of the Friday the 13th movies.
Yeah. I actually read that he insisted on doing his own stunts for Hatchet, even the really dangerous ones.
He's hardcore, man. He really commits to his roles, and you can see that on screen. Victor Crowley is terrifying because Kane Hodder is terrifying.
He's completely embodied that character.
Yeah.
And I think it's even more impressive because he's actually a really nice guy in real life.
Yeah, a total contrast.
It shows how talented he is to be able to transform like that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The classic slasher vibes, the depth of the characters, those awesome practical effects, the humor, even the fandom. Is there anything else we should touch on?
One thing that stands out to me is that Hatchet isn't some big Hollywood blockbuster, right? It's proof that you don't need a huge budget to make something amazing.
Yeah, it's like a testament to independent filmmaking.
Totally. Hatchet was made with passion and a true love for horror, and you can feel that when you watch it.
It's inspiring. Like, it shows that anyone with a good idea and enough drive can create something truly special.
Exactly. Hatchet is a reminder that sometimes the most interesting and impactful films come from outside the system.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the Hatchet franchise. We've explored the blood, the guts, the humor, and the heart of this cult classic horror series. We hope you've enjoyed this gruesome journey, and who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to check it out yourself. Just be careful out there in the swamp.